Have audiences been tricked into believing the 1980s produced only a few great war movies? The same famous titles appear on every list, while dozens of powerful films remain buried under forgotten VHS covers. Today, we are uncovering 18 overlooked war movies that prove the decade had far more courage, emotion, and cinematic firepower than Hollywood usually admits. Before we begin, please like this video, share, and subscribe to our channel. Number 18. The Seawolves, 1980. At number 18 is The Seawolves, an old-fashioned wartime adventure with a cast that sounds almost too impressive to be real. Gregory Peck, Roger Moore, David Niven, Trevor Howard, and Patrick McNee join forces in a story inspired by Operation Creek, a secret British mission carried out during World War II. German submarines are sinking Allied ships in the Indian Ocean because hidden agents are secretly transmitting their locations. British intelligence discovers that the radio signal is coming from a German merchant vessel sitting inside the neutral Portuguese territory of Goa. A normal military attack could create an international crisis, so intelligence officers develop a strange alternative. They recruit members of the Calcutta Light Horse, a group of older British veterans who have not seen serious action for years. These men have businesses, families, tired bodies, and little reason to expect another mission. Their age, however, becomes the perfect disguise. Nobody believes that a group of middle-aged gentlemen could be preparing to board a German ship. The most memorable sequence arrives when the volunteers approach the harbor aboard an old riverboat. Their relaxed appearance disappears as they climb onto the enemy vessel and begin searching for the transmitter. The operation feels both dangerous and strangely charming because these are not young action heroes. They are ordinary veterans receiving one final opportunity to serve. Number 17. Attack Force Z, 1982. Long before Mel Gibson and Sam Neill became international stars, they appeared together in Attack Force Z, an Australian wartime adventure inspired by the real operations of Z Special Unit. This joint Allied commando force conducted dangerous reconnaissance, rescue, and sabotage missions across Japanese-occupied Southeast Asia. The story follows 5 commandos who travel by submarine and small folding boats to an enemy-controlled island. Their official assignment is to find survivors from a crashed aircraft. However, the mission is more important than most members of the team realize. One survivor may possess information capable of affecting the war, meaning the commandos must either rescue him or prevent his capture. The movie quickly establishes that this will not be a clean, heroic adventure. When one team member is badly wounded and cannot continue, the soldiers face a cold decision. Leaving him behind could expose the entire operation. That moment introduces the film's central question: how much humanity can soldiers protect when secrecy is considered more important than individual life? One of its strongest sections takes place near a Buddhist temple, where the commandos are separated during an attack. The peaceful setting clashes with the sudden confusion of the fighting. Elsewhere, local resistance members must decide whether helping the outsiders is worth risking their families. And before we continue, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another forgotten classic. Also, tell us in the comments which overlooked war movie deserves a place in a future countdown. The next film replaces rifles with football boots, but behind the cheering crowd waits one of cinema's most unusual prisoner of war stories. Number 16. Escape to Victory, 1981. Escape to Victory, also released simply as Victory, should be much more famous considering the people involved. John Huston directed it, while Michael Caine, Sylvester Stallone, Max von Sydow, Pelé, Bobby Moore, and several professional football players appeared in front of the camera. The story takes place inside a German prisoner of war camp during World War II. Major Karl von Steiner, a former football player serving as a German officer, notices British prisoner John Colby playing the sport. Steiner proposes an exhibition match between Allied prisoners and a German team. The event is meant to become propaganda, proving German superiority before a large audience. The prisoners see another possibility. Their resistance contacts can create an escape tunnel beneath the stadium dressing room. However, the plan becomes complicated when the players begin viewing the match as more than a cover. Escaping at halftime would be sensible, but walking away while losing would allow the propaganda victory to stand. The famous scene is Pelé's slow-motion bicycle kick. Despite playing with an injured shoulder, his character launches himself backward and sends the ball into the net. Even viewers who do not follow football can feel the excitement because the goal represents dignity rather than sport alone. Sylvester Stallone plays goalkeeper Robert Hatch, an American prisoner who initially cares more about escaping than joining the team. His final penalty save completes his transformation, while the crowd floods the field and helps the prisoners disappear. Number 15, Don't Cry, It's Only Thunder. 1982. Some war movies focus on famous battles. Don't Cry, It's Only Thunder focuses on the people who are normally left outside the history books. Dennis Christopher plays Brian Anderson, a young American Army medic stationed in Saigon during the Vietnam War. Brian is not introduced as a perfect hero. He is frustrated, emotionally distant, and mostly interested in surviving his service without becoming involved in other people's problems. That changes after a fellow soldier makes him promise to help a local orphanage. At first, Brian treats the responsibility like an unwanted chore. The children need food, medicine, repairs, and protection, while military officers do not consider the orphanage important. Slowly, Brian begins caring about them. What started as a promise becomes the only part of the war that gives him a clear purpose. The most moving scenes are not traditional combat sequences. They show Brian trying to create moments of normal childhood inside a city shaped by fear and uncertainty. When the orphanage is endangered, he must choose between following regulations and protecting children who have nobody else. Susan St. James plays a doctor who understands the cost of Brian's growing commitment. Robert Englund also appears years before becoming famous through horror movies, giving viewers another reason to search for this overlooked production. The film was written by Vietnam veteran Paul G. Hensler, who wanted to show humanitarian behavior alongside military corruption and suffering. Some critics considered the story sentimental, and its limited production values prevented it from becoming a major success. Number 14. Streamers, 1983. Robert Altman's Streamers barely shows the Vietnam War, yet its presence hangs over every conversation. Adapted from David Rabe's stage play, the film takes place almost entirely inside an army barracks in Virginia during 1965. Three soldiers share the room while waiting to learn whether they will be sent overseas. Billy is a friendly young man from Wisconsin. Roger is intelligent, controlled, and determined to avoid unnecessary trouble. Richie is wealthy, sensitive, and openly different from the men around him. Their uneasy friendship functions until Carlisle, an angry soldier from another unit, begins visiting the barracks. Carlisle carries resentment toward the army, society, and almost everyone he meets. His arguments with Roger expose differences in how the two men respond to prejudice and military authority. Richie's behavior creates another source of tension, while Billy keeps pretending that friendship can hold the room together. Altman does not offer large battles or heroic speeches. He allows conversations to overlap, jokes to become insults, and small disagreements to grow dangerous. The wooden barracks begins feeling like a sealed container, with too much pressure inside it. The unforgettable sequence comes during the final confrontation, when months of fear and anger suddenly break through the surface. Afterward, an older sergeant softly sings the song that gives the story its title. The calmness of his voice makes the outcome even more painful. All four main actors received acting honors together at the Venice Film Festival, an unusual recognition of the film's ensemble strength. Streamers is overlooked because many viewers do not consider it a conventional war movie. But that is its power. It shows soldiers being psychologically reshaped before they have even reached the battlefield. From Men Waiting for Vietnam, we travel to Nicaragua, where journalists discover that a camera can become both a witness and a weapon. Number 13, Under Fire, 1983. Under Fire is a war movie about journalists, but it never presents them as neutral observers, standing safely outside the conflict. Nick Nolte plays Russell Price, a photographer who moves from one international crisis to another. Joanna Cassidy is Claire Strider, a radio journalist involved with television reporter Alex Grazier, played by Gene Hackman. Their professional and personal relationships become complicated as they travel to Nicaragua during the final days of the Somoza government. The country is collapsing into rebellion. Government forces hunt supporters of the underground leader Rafael, while foreign reporters compete for the photograph or interview that could define their careers. Russell eventually discovers that Rafael is already dead. The rebels ask him to photograph the body in a way that makes their leader appear alive, hoping the image will keep the revolution united. That staged photograph is the movie's central moral turning point. Russell knows a journalist should document events rather than manufacture them. Yet he also understands that releasing the image could protect the rebellion from immediate defeat. The most powerful scene comes later, when Alex approaches nervous government soldiers on a street. Russell continues taking photographs as the encounter suddenly turns fatal. His camera records evidence that officials desperately want destroyed. From that moment, he is no longer simply reporting the conflict. He is carrying proof that could change its outcome. Director Roger Spottiswoode builds tension without turning the journalists into flawless champions. They lie, betray one another, cross ethical lines, and occasionally use suffering to advance their careers. Jerry Goldsmith's score and John Alcott's photography give the film a sweaty, dangerous atmosphere. Under Fire deserves to stand beside the better-known political thrillers of its decade because it asks an uncomfortable question. When truth can alter a war, is refusing to choose a side really possible? The camera now leaves the streets and enters a prison, where communication between captured men becomes an act of resistance. Number 12, The Hanoi Hilton, 1987. Released during a decade filled with action-heavy Vietnam movies, the Hanoi Hilton took a slower and more controlled approach. Instead of following soldiers through jungles, it follows American prisoners held inside North Vietnam's Ho Lo prison from the mid-1960s into the 1970s. Michael Moriarty plays Lieutenant Commander Patrick Williamson, a naval aviator whose aircraft is brought down during a mission. After being captured, he is taken to the prison that American servicemen sarcastically call the Hanoi Hilton. The name sounds almost comfortable, but the conditions are anything but comfortable. Williamson and the other prisoners face isolation, harsh questioning, propaganda demands, and constant efforts to break their unity. Senior prisoners attempt to preserve military discipline even when separated from one another. They create communication systems through walls and quietly share names, information, and encouragement. One of the movie's best recurring elements is the tapping code. A simple pattern against a wall allows men who cannot see each other to exchange messages. The sound may be small, but inside the prison, it becomes proof that nobody is completely alone. Another memorable section shows officials trying to force prisoners into public statements. The men understand that their words will be presented as voluntary, so every response becomes a battle between survival and loyalty. The film uses fictional composite characters, but its setting and central experiences were drawn from accounts of American prisoners. It was not a commercial success, and earned far less attention than louder Vietnam productions released around the same period. Its restraint is exactly why it deserves another look. The Hanoi Hilton is not built around a single rescue or victory. It is about surviving one day, then another, while refusing to allow imprisonment to erase identity, friendship, and hope. From soldiers struggling to return home, we turn toward those already home, performing the painful duty of receiving everyone who did not return. Number 11. Gardens of Stone, 1987. Francis Ford Coppola had already made one of cinema's most famous Vietnam films. Then he made Gardens of Stone, a much quieter story about the war's impact inside the United States. James Caan plays Sergeant First Class Clell Hazard, a decorated veteran assigned to the Old Guard at Fort Myer. The unit performs ceremonies and conducts military funerals at Arlington National Cemetery. Hazard considers the duty honorable, but he is frustrated because his experience could be used to train soldiers who are still being sent into combat. A young soldier named Jackie Willow arrives with dreams of becoming an officer and proving himself in Vietnam. Hazard sees intelligence and courage in him, but he also recognizes dangerous innocence. He knows that bravery cannot protect a soldier who has not been properly prepared. James Earl Jones plays Sergeant Major Goody Nelson, Hazard's longtime friend. Together, they represent older professionals who understand military service but no longer accept simple heroic stories about war. The movie's most memorable sequence comes at Willow's funeral. Earlier scenes show him eager to reach Vietnam. Now his flag-covered coffin returns to Arlington. Hazard removes his combat infantryman badge and places it on the coffin, silently giving the young man the recognition he had wanted. The final rifle salute and the playing of taps are presented without triumphant excitement. The ceremony is perfect, controlled, and respectful, which only makes the personal loss feel greater. Gardens of Stone performed poorly at the box office and received mixed reviews because audiences expected another large Coppola war epic. Instead, he delivered a film about mentorship, ritual, grief, and the distance between military tradition and political decisions. It may be incomplete in places, but James Caan and James Earl Jones give it a dignity that deserves renewed attention. Quiet military ceremony now gives way to thundering hooves as Australian riders prepare for one of World War I's boldest charges. Number 10. The Lighthorsemen, 1987. Australia produced several impressive war films during the 1980s, but The Lighthorsemen is among the most visually exciting and least discussed. The film follows members of the Australian Light Horse during the Sinai and Palestine campaign of World War I. These troops normally used horses for fast movement before dismounting to fight. They were not traditional cavalry carrying long swords into every battle. The story builds toward the Battle of Beersheba in 1917. British forces need to capture the town and its vital wells before their soldiers and horses run out of water. Earlier attacks have failed, and commanders begin considering a risky mounted assault by the Australian 4th and 12th Light Horse Regiments. Several fictional soldiers give the battle a personal viewpoint. Dave, a young trooper, struggles with the reality of fighting and eventually joins the medical detachment. Other men joke, argue, form friendships, and wait under the growing pressure of the campaign. Everything leads to the charge at Beersheba, the sequence for which the film is remembered. Hundreds of riders line up across the open ground before beginning their advance. The pace increases until the entire formation is racing toward the defensive trenches. The opposing troops initially expect the Australians to dismount. By the time they understand that the riders are continuing at full speed, their weapons are aimed incorrectly, and the Australians are nearly on top of them. The sequence uses real horses, stunt riders, wide photography, and practical effects, giving it a physical force that computer-generated action often lacks. The movie takes some dramatic liberties, but its climax is based on a real and remarkable military operation. The Australian riders captured Beersheba and secured its wells. For that breathtaking final charge alone, the Light Horsemen should never have become a forgotten title. The open desert disappears beneath rain and mud as American infantrymen begin climbing a hill that seems determined to reject them. Number 9. Hamburger Hill, 1987. The year 1987 gave audiences several major Vietnam movies, and Hamburger Hill was overshadowed by nearly all of them. That does not mean it was weaker. In several ways, it was more focused. The movie dramatizes the May 1969 battle for Hill 937, also called Dong Ap Bia, near the border with Laos. Soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division are ordered to capture a heavily defended position held by North Vietnamese forces. Rather than following a single glamorous hero, the story introduces a platoon of young men with different backgrounds. Some are experienced. Others are replacements who have barely learned the routines of jungle warfare. They talk about family, racial division, politics, girlfriends, and the growing anger directed at soldiers by people back home. The hill becomes the movie's main character. Rain turns the ground into mud. Trees are stripped away. Every attack gains a little territory before the soldiers are forced back again. exhaustion becomes as dangerous as enemy fire. One of the most painful moments occurs when supporting aircraft mistakenly strike near American positions. The men are already struggling upward, and now confusion from their own side adds another layer of danger. The famous final sequence shows the survivors reaching the summit after repeated attempts. There is no grand celebration. Wounded and completely drained, they sit in the dirt while the battlefield becomes quiet. The victory feels almost empty because so many friends are missing. Director John Irvin and screenwriter James Karabatsos, a Vietnam veteran, keep attention on the infantrymen rather than the larger political debate. The film ends with words honoring the soldiers who could not return. Hamburger Hill may lack the awards and reputation of its famous competitors, but its muddy realism and respect for ordinary troops make it one of the decade's strongest combat films. That exhausting climb is followed by a different nightmare: a Soviet tank lost in Afghanistan, hunted through unfamiliar mountains by survivors seeking revenge. Number 8. The Beast, 1988. Also known as The Beast of War, this film takes viewers inside a Soviet tank during the Soviet-Afghan War, something rarely attempted by American cinema. The story begins in 1981 as a Soviet armored unit attacks an Afghan village believed to be helping resistance fighters. One tank, commanded by the cruel Daskal, becomes separated from the others and enters a valley with no clear exit. Stephen Bauer plays Taj, a local fighter whose family and village have been destroyed. He leads a small group in pursuit of the tank, using a captured rocket launcher they are struggling to repair. Inside the vehicle, Daskal's authority begins to collapse. Jason Patrick plays Konstantin Koverchenko, the tank driver. He becomes increasingly disturbed by his commander's decisions, especially after Daskal turns against members of his own crew. Eventually, Koverchenko is abandoned in the desert and discovered by Taj's group. The film introduces the Pashtun tradition of Nanawatai, which requires sanctuary to be offered to someone who asks for protection. Although Koverchenko is an enemy soldier, the fighters honor the custom. He repairs their weapon and joins the effort to stop his former commander. The tank chase through the narrow valley is the movie's great set piece. The machine is powerful, but the landscape slowly turns it into a trapped animal. In the climax, village women bring rocks and explosives down from the cliffs, disabling the tank just before it escapes. The most surprising moment comes when Koverchenko asks Taj to spare the surviving crew, extending the same mercy he received. The war has placed them on opposite sides, yet both understand that Daskal's cruelty does not represent every soldier. With real tanks, desert locations, and a haunting Mark Isham score, The Beast is a tense mechanical thriller and a serious study of occupation, revenge, and military obedience. From a tank trapped among mountains, we return to Vietnam, where one downed officer must navigate enemy territory using an imaginary golf course. Number 7. Bat-21, 1988. Bat-21 is based on the rescue of Lieutenant Colonel I.C.L. Hambleton, an American electronic warfare specialist whose aircraft was brought down during the Vietnam War. Gene Hackman plays Hambleton, a middle-aged officer with access to highly sensitive information. When he lands behind enemy lines, military commanders consider his recovery essential. However, the region is filled with opposing forces, and a major American bombing operation is approaching. Danny Glover plays Captain Bartholomew Clark, a forward air controller who communicates with Hambleton from a small observation aircraft. Clark cannot simply fly down and collect him. Rescue helicopters face defensive fire, while enemy patrols search the ground. The most inventive part of the story is the code used to guide Hambleton toward safety. Because he is familiar with golf, locations and distances are described as holes on a course he knows. Enemy listeners hear ordinary golf references, while Hambleton imagines the course and converts those instructions into movements across the landscape. The film becomes increasingly personal when rescue attempts cost other men their lives. Hambleton begins questioning how many people should be placed in danger to save one officer, even one carrying valuable secrets. A memorable sequence shows Clark ignoring orders and flying dangerously low to maintain contact. The little aircraft feels exposed against the enormous landscape. But Clark refuses to abandon the voice on his radio. Hackman avoids turning Hambleton into an invincible action figure. He is frightened, tired, and forced to confront the difference between studying warfare from an aircraft and surviving it alone on the ground. Glover brings warmth and determination, making the connection between the two men the film's emotional center. It simplifies parts of the real operation, but Bat-21 remains a tightly constructed rescue drama about responsibility, guilt, and trust between people who can hear but cannot see each other. The jungle rescue now changes into a murder investigation, revealing that wartime Saigon could hide dangers wearing American uniforms. Number 6. Off Limits, 1988. Off Limits, released in some countries as Saigon, combines a Vietnam War drama with a dark police thriller. Willem Dafoe and Gregory Hines play Buck McGriff and Alba B. Perkins, two plainclothes military investigators working in Saigon during 1968. When a local woman is found murdered in an area officially forbidden to American servicemen, they are assigned to the case. What initially appears to be an isolated crime develops into a pattern. Several women have died in similar circumstances, but earlier investigations were quietly closed. The evidence suggests that the person responsible may be connected to the American military and protected by rank. McGriff and Perkins receive help from Sister Nicole, a French nun played by Amanda Pays. She works with vulnerable women and understands parts of Saigon that military officials prefer to ignore. Their investigation takes them through crowded streets, military offices, nightclubs, hospitals, and dangerous back alleys. One of the film's most shocking scenes involves a suspected officer being questioned aboard a helicopter. Before the investigators can learn the complete truth, the situation takes an unexpected turn in mid-air, leaving them with more questions than answers. The mystery is important, but the setting gives the movie its real power. Saigon appears noisy, humid, crowded, and morally confused. And the investigators are supposed to enforce military law, yet their greatest obstacle may be the same institution that gave them authority. Fred Ward delivers a strong supporting performance as Master Sergeant Dix, while Scott Glenn appears as a senior officer whose calm behavior makes him difficult to understand. Off Limits struggled commercially, and later found more viewers through cable television and home video. It deserves another chance, because it examines the Vietnam War from a rare angle, not through a battlefield patrol, but through two investigators trying to uncover the truth inside a system determined to protect itself. The investigation used cameras to uncover evidence. The next film places the camera directly inside a patrol and never allows viewers to escape. Number 5. 84 Charlie Mopic, 1989. Years before found footage movies became popular, 84 Charlie Mopic presented an entire Vietnam patrol through the camera of a military filmmaker. The title comes from the Army designation connected with a motion picture cameraman. A young cameraman, known mainly as Mopic, joins a small reconnaissance team moving through enemy-controlled territory. His assignment is to record material showing how long-range patrols operate. At first, the soldiers are irritated by his presence. A camera cannot carry ammunition, watch a trail, or immediately help during an emergency. Some men perform for the lens, while others tell Mopic to stay out of their way. Gradually, however, the camera becomes accepted as another member of the group. The movie records ordinary details often removed from traditional war films. The patrol checks footprints, listens for distant movement, jokes quietly, rests, argues, and waits. Long periods of caution are interrupted by sudden danger. Because viewers only see what Mopic records, information is always incomplete. The most effective sequence comes when the patrol is attacked and the formation begins breaking apart. The camera shakes, drops toward the ground, and struggles to keep up. There is no wide, heroic view explaining where everyone is located. The audience experiences the same confusion as the soldiers. As the mission grows worse, Mopic must decide whether to continue filming or put down the camera and help. That question gives the movie emotional weight. Is he merely documenting the patrol, or has he become responsible for the people in front of his lens? Writer-director Patrick Sheen Duncan served in Vietnam, and the film draws from soldiers' memories rather than action movie formulas. Its tiny budget limited its release, but also created its realism. Without '84 Charlie Mopic, later military found-footage films would look far less original. It remains one of the most intimate and formally daring Vietnam movies ever made. The camera's narrow viewpoint opens onto a much larger battle, as an undermanned Firebase prepares to face the Tet Offensive. Number 4. The Siege of Firebase Gloria, 1989. The title, The Siege of Firebase Gloria, sounds like a routine, low-budget action movie. That expectation may explain why so many viewers have ignored it. The film is much more intense and thoughtful than its simple title suggests. Set during the Tet Offensive, the story begins with a Marine reconnaissance unit led by Sergeant Major Bill Hafner and Corporal Joseph DiNardo. R. Lee Ermey plays Hafner, bringing the military authority that made him famous, while Wings Hauser gives DiNardo a mixture of toughness and emotional exhaustion. After moving through devastated villages and discovering signs of a major enemy operation, the unit reaches Firebase Gloria. The position is poorly prepared, discipline is collapsing, and its commanding officer is no longer capable of leading effectively. Hafner takes control. He reorganizes defenses, places weapons, motivates frightened soldiers, and warns everyone that a major attack is coming. DiNardo, meanwhile, forms a protective connection with a Vietnamese child found during the patrol. The famous sections are the night attacks on the Firebase. Flares hang over the battlefield while waves of fighters move through smoke, trenches, and defensive wire. The action is staged with impressive clarity, allowing viewers to understand how close the position is to being overrun. Yet the movie also gives the opposing commander a viewpoint. He knows his forces are suffering enormous losses, but he believes continued pressure will weaken American willingness to remain in Vietnam. That perspective prevents the story from becoming a simple celebration. By the final assault, both sides have lost so many people that survival no longer feels like victory. Hafner and the enemy commander briefly recognize one another across the ruined battlefield. Two professionals trapped inside decisions made far above them. Filmed in the Philippines with limited resources, The Siege of Firebase Gloria delivers sustained practical action, strong performances, and an unusually clear understanding of military exhaustion. After defending a position at any cost, the next hero tries to escape the war entirely, only to discover it has followed him into Borneo. Number 3. Farewell to the King, 1989. John Milius's Farewell to the King is part World War II adventure, part jungle epic, and part tragedy about a man attempting to create his own world outside modern civilization. Nick Nolte plays Leroy, an American soldier who escapes after his companions are captured in the Pacific. He enters the Borneo jungle alone, nearly dying before members of a Dayak community discover him. When British commandos arrive several years later, they find that Leroy has become the community's king. He has married, learned local traditions, and built a life far from the military system he abandoned. The Dayaks do not see him simply as an outsider. He has become responsible for their safety and future. Captain Fairborn, played by Nigel Havers, asks Leroy to help the Allies fight Japanese forces occupying the region. Leroy initially refuses. He believes joining the war will bring destruction to people who have no interest in the arguments of distant governments. That hope disappears when Japanese troops threaten the community. Leroy organizes the Dayaks into a fighting force, using his military experience while trying to preserve their independence. The battle sequences are wide, physical, and beautifully photographed by Dean Semler. One especially memorable attack moves through tall grass and jungle positions as Dayak fighters combine traditional methods with captured modern weapons. However, the film's strongest moments arrive after the excitement. Leroy realizes that even victory will connect his adopted people to a world of outside powers, borders, and political control. He may defeat one enemy, but cannot permanently protect the isolated kingdom he loves. Basil Polidorus provides a sweeping score, while Nolte gives Leroy the roughness of a deserter and the sadness of a ruler who knows his world is ending. The studio reportedly reduced Milius's preferred version, leaving parts of the story uneven. Even so, Farewell to the King remains an ambitious, beautiful adventure, deserving far more respect. From a king losing his adopted world, we turn to three Australian officers, discovering that an empire may sacrifice its own soldiers. Number 2. Breaker Morant, 1980. Breaker Morant contains fewer battlefield scenes than most films on this list, yet almost every courtroom exchange feels like combat. Set during the final period of the Second Boer War, the film follows Australian lieutenants Harry Breaker Morant, Peter Hancock, and George Whitten. The men served in the Bushveld Carbineers, a British unit fighting Boer commandos in South Africa. They are placed on trial for killing captured fighters and a German missionary. The British command insists that the men acted illegally. The defendants argue that they followed unwritten orders created by a brutal guerrilla war, where uniforms, front lines, and normal rules had largely disappeared. Jack Thompson plays Major James Thomas, the defense officer given almost no time to prepare. He begins as an inexperienced military lawyer, but quickly realizes that the verdict may already have been decided. Britain is negotiating peace and wants to prove that it can punish misconduct. Three colonial officers make convenient examples. The courtroom scenes are interrupted by flashbacks showing the events under discussion. These sequences reveal that the men did commit serious acts, preventing the story from offering an easy declaration of innocence. The real issue is whether commanders who created the policy are now pretending it never existed. One unforgettable scene shows Thomas questioning the idea of applying clean rules to a dirty guerrilla conflict. Another comes near the end, as workers build coffins outside the prison, while Morant and Hancock wait inside. Their final walk is calm and stripped of sentiment. The men sit before the firing squad and refuse blindfolds, determined to face the result directly. Meanwhile, Whitten is taken away to begin a life sentence. Director Bruce Beresford turns a military trial into a sharp examination of empire, obedience, responsibility, and political convenience. Breaker Morant is not forgotten by serious film historians, but mainstream audiences still overlook one of Australia's greatest anti-war dramas. Our final film removes nearly every trace of adventure, glory, and comfort, showing war through the changing face of one terrified child. Number 1. Come and See, 1985. At number 1 is Come and See, a Soviet film that does not merely tell a wartime story. It traps viewers inside the experience of a child whose understanding of the world is being destroyed. The story takes place in German-occupied Belarus during World War II. Flyora, a teenage boy, digs through the sand until he finds an abandoned rifle. Despite his mother's fear, he believes the weapon will allow him to join the Soviet partisans and become part of a heroic adventure. That belief disappears almost immediately. Flyora is left behind when the main partisan group moves out. He meets Gloria, a young woman connected to the camp, and the two survive an attack that leaves Flyora partly unable to hear. The soundtrack becomes distorted, placing the audience inside his confusion. When Flyora returns home, he finds the house empty. He refuses to understand what has happened, even when Gloria notices evidence behind them. From that point, the film becomes a journey through destroyed villages, displaced families, collaboration, hunger, and organized terror. The most famous extended sequence takes place in a village whose residents are forced into a wooden building. Director Elim Klimov keeps the camera close to Flyora's face as he attempts to understand events no child should witness. The film avoids the excitement often created by conventional battle editing. Everything feels chaotic, humiliating, and painfully real. By the final act, Flyora's young face appears to have aged many years. He discovers a portrait of Adolf Hitler lying in the mud and repeatedly fires into it. Newsreel images then move backward through history. When the montage reaches Hitler as a baby with his mother, Flyora stops. Even after everything he has seen, he cannot fire at an innocent child. That moment explains the entire film. War has nearly taken Flyora's humanity, but not completely. Come and See is difficult, unforgettable, and among the strongest anti-war films ever created. How did so many excellent war movies disappear, while weaker films remained famous? These 18 titles prove that popularity and quality are not always the same thing. From secret sea missions to muddy hills, prison walls, courtrooms, and shattered villages, each film shows a different face of war. Tell us which movie surprised you most, and which forgotten title we unfairly missed. Like, share, subscribe, and keep classic cinema alive.